Okay, thank you. So thank you for having me. My name is Kent Mundle. I'm a researcher and lecturer at the University of Hong Kong and a member of District Development Unit, or DDU, which is an initiative of Joshua Bolkover of Rural Urban Framework, which has widened its previous view from China's urbanizing rural landscape towards acting as an impact enterprise in emerging markets more broadly. The world's climatic future hinges on how developing regions grow. How we build in these areas will determine how we consume energy and emit carbon for generations. The developing world is projected to add 3.6 billion square meters of housing each year, with the construction industry accounting for 39% of carbon emissions and energy use. Just within this 5 hour flight radius of Hong Kong, where DDU is situated, approximately 321 million people live in unsustainable and inadequate homes vulnerable to climate risk. There is no shortage of urgency or need to act. Our work is predicated on the fact that today's rural landscapes are rapidly undergoing the process of becoming urban. Rapid urbanization will cause emerging economies to add close to 2 billion inhabitants to their urban populations by 2050. This relentless production of urban matter to support this growth is inextricably tied to the prevailing crises of the 21st century, the climate, and the increasing wealth gap between the world's rich and poor. However, our responsibility to shape these profound urgencies has become diffused and displaced. It's not me or us, but it's somewhere else and seemingly inevitable. The contingent effects and reciprocal dynamics between the developed and developing regions have to be realigned. DDU's position hinges on the fact that sustainable investment and green finance are an opportunity to act and address this disparity. However, there's a lack of funds being directed towards the built environment in the developing world, and so the main hurdle for investment is a lack of packaged, bankable, and scalable projects. So this is where DDU comes in. We connect sustainable finance opportunities to scalable housing products and urban infrastructure. We integrate research and analysis to deliver evidence-based, high-impact projects. We act where conventional methods of development stagnate, and we develop strategies that scale. So the method and position of DDU aims to reposition the role of the architect in these areas from the architect as service provider to this notion of the architect as an impact enterprise. This method is enabled by the research conducted at the Rural Urban Lab at the University of Hong Kong with Professor Bolkover. And so through the lab, we work closely with NGOs, local academics, government, and professionals in the construction industry to identify opportunities for intervention and develop innovative solutions. Our approach involves detailed spatial analysis, community engagement, specialist technical input, and financial planning. And we provide an integrated approach that includes water, waste, energy, public space, and community infrastructure. We build pilots first to verify performance before scaling production. We then test and analyze these pilots so that we know what we build works. And so the impetus for DDU emerged as a model of practice through our work in Mongolia, where the team has been researching and practicing since 2014. And through this work, we found that conventional modes of development were stagnating to meet the emergent conditions of the residents. So the reimagining of Ulaanbaatar from a Soviet city to an investment capital in 1991 fueled the desire for many to leave the countryside and move to the city. Since 1991, the urban population has doubled. The city's administrative territory has expanded to over 35 times its original size. 840,000 people, which is 60% of the city's population, live in these informal settlements that surround the periphery of Ulaanbaatar, which are known as the Gur districts. And so through this process, the once nomadic vernacular tents, or Gur, which enabled assembly and disassembly while herding on the steppe, it now finds itself bound within the fenced plot of the Gur districts. Despite this, however, life within the Gur remains unchanged. And the transition, though, has forced these residents to confront new issues specific to the urban condition, such as living with neighbors, traveling to collect water, digging pit latrines as there's no sewage infrastructure in the Gur districts, and coping with urban pollution, as each Gur district household uses approximately 4 tons of unrefined coal as their main heating source each winter. However, Despite this transition to urban life, as people build new homes and continue to embed themselves into the landscape, the gur remains because it is still the cheapest way of making space. So if it's something that everyone has, then a strategy to improve these settlements in situ would have to include the gur. So from this hypothesis emerged the first prototype as a test towards upgrading the homes of these areas. This is the gur plugin, which provided the gur with everything it does not have: a toilet, a shower, an electric heating system, and increased thermal insulation. The gur plugin allowed residents to use 93% less coal than their previous year living in a gur. However, the limit of this prototype was its inability to grow or scale, and therefore have the capacity to impact the larger settlements as an urban condition. And so through this process of community workshops and household visits, we developed an alternative model for in situ upgrading that would provide a framework for residents to upgrade their plots incrementally. We made this strategy available to residents through a document distributed throughout the GER districts, the Incremental Development Manual. And so this incremental strategy demonstrates a collaborative approach for neighboring families to provide decentralized infrastructure and energy efficient housing with improved thermal performance, reduced carbon emissions, and built-in sanitation, all without the need to relocate households. Within the manual are a series of housing products that the residents could choose from and embed within this infrastructural framework. So depending on their needs, and this is the GER plugin, now with the capacity to grow as the household's needs transform over time. The apartment house addresses the different household structures found in the GER districts. It's a flexible house that can be used by one large extended family or divided into 3 separate units, each with their own shower, toilet, heating system, and kitchen. And the half house is an extension to existing uninsulated or incomplete homes. So compared to other efficient housing products available to residents, our houses are the only ones that can be built in stages and the only ones that integrate the traditional GER. Additionally, they're the only ones that offer that same energy performance for just half the cost. So according to our market research, there's over 65,000 households that are prepared to purchase a home in the next 5 years. Our aim is to scale up our capacity to build maybe 100 houses in the next 3 in order to prove that this strategy can have an impact at scale. And so to do this, we've set up a local company with some local partners, and we're building a demo site of the strategy, which will allow us to demonstrate the houses to residents, local green banks, government officials, and other development agencies, as well as to audit the buildings to prove that they perform as we claim. And so the project is beginning to demonstrate some support from residents. There's a video of it made by a local media personality, received over 1 million views within 2 weeks, which is almost equal to the entire population of Ulaanbaatar. And the support is important because the potential for impact is so great. If each of the 163,000 GER households was replaced by a GER plugin, this would result in an estimated savings of 576,000 tons of coal per year. Residents will have direct access to clean water, sanitation, and sewage, and air quality will improve, which will keep residents healthy. And so while we continue this work in Mongolia, we are testing the method and DDU model that it can be applied in other rapidly developing areas. And so our work in Nepal is in a more preliminary piloting stage. In 2015, 2 earthquakes struck Nepal, damaging or destroying over 1 million homes. While there's been a significant effort to rebuild the rural housing stock, only 38% of the homes in the Kathmandu Valley, Nepal's most populous urban center, have been rebuilt. And so this restriction to urban reconstruction has actually fueled urbanization of rural territory, as those who cannot rebuild in urban contexts are retreating to build in the periphery where construction is easier or more affordable. So these are images from a recent visit just a couple weeks ago in Kathmandu, where the effects of that earthquake are still very much a part of the urban fabric. And so rural-urban migration after the earthquake has accelerated Kathmandu's growth, despite it already being one of the world's most rapidly urbanizing regions following this transition to cities during the 1996 to 2006 civil war. And so this image demonstrates the transformation of what was once rural in just recent decades. Traveling along the highway from Kathmandu to peripheral settlements, the view across the valley is almost indistinguishable from many developing contexts, as it's replete with the same ubiquitous 3 to 4 story concrete frame dwelling, which is the dominant typology fueling urbanization in rapidly developing areas globally. In contrast, most of these towns contain a historical central core area which are comprised of temple structures, courtyards, stepped water wells, and narrow stone paved streets. But in the aftermath of the Gorka earthquake in 2015, around 475,000 of these traditionally constructed buildings that make up these urban fabrics were destroyed, and that represented about 96% of all of the buildings lost. So despite mounting efforts from conservationists, building in the traditional manner is no longer popular amongst residents due to the building's failure in the earthquake, but also the fact that they're 74% more expensive to build than concrete frame brick infill construction. Kathmandu residents' desire and necessity for a modern home began when the country opened to the world for the first time in a century in 1951, which brought on a wave of foreign influence via media, financial aid, and development agencies, as well as concrete as a new material in the valley. And so this led to concrete frame houses multiplying in the city's periphery. This has accelerated in the turbulent decades since, and even more so after the earthquake. The clearing of damaged buildings has resulted in the creation of many empty vacant sites, which revealed a lack of clear records of land ownership and disputes between generational families. When there's more than one inheritor, land is subdivided equally, and the escalating cost of land in Kathmandu has increased this pressure to obtain separate land ownership rather than sharing with one's siblings as was done in the past. And so as a result, very narrow buildings are built, which are often as small as 15% of municipal recommendations, but they're also extremely vulnerable to future earthquakes. Otherwise, the resulting divided land is often too small to build on at all, and so the land remains vacant. And in some cases, existing houses are physically split and redeveloped while the original half is still occupied. And so in response to this, through interviews and workshops, we've established a scope and brief for an infill housing prototype that could provide an affordable, sustainable, and seismically resilient alternative that can meet these social challenges that are withholding reconstruction. The prototype structure is comprised of a central reinforced core with cantilevered beams to hold up the floors. This removes the need for any columns or foundations on the site boundary, which limits potential damage from neighboring buildings, which was a significant cause of failure in 2015. And so this central stair within the core can either be shared or scissored depending on the resident's preference. And this enables the house to be lived in as a single collective family house, divided vertically between siblings or two families, as well as split floor by floor into apartments for rental tenancy, which is becoming increasingly popular. And so the provision of this flexibility aims to address the land disputes that have been withholding reconstruction. And the prototype adheres to the spatial qualities of the traditional settlement by allowing for a flexible ground floor, enabling certain traditional urban features such as an open shop front, courtyard to street passages, and ground floor public spaces for gathering. In comparison with the conventional concrete frame, the design reduces the use of concrete by 58%. The prototype also allows for more lighter, sustainable cladding options than the typical fired bricks. And so we've been working with local carpenters to design a facade system using salvaged traditional building components, which also contribute to the criteria of heritage settlements. And so preliminary costs from local contractors have come in around the same cost as concrete frame construction, which is critical in order for this prototype to become scalable. And so the next step will be to pilot the project to confirm these speculations and integrate it within a manual for residents and development agencies and government ministries, just as we've done in Mongolia. Additionally, we're starting to map these other types of infill sites for future versions of house prototypes to be able to respond to. So finally, I'll touch very briefly on our work in Manila, where over 3 million people live in inadequate housing without access to infrastructure or sanitation. Manila offers another view to this process of becoming urban, where informal settlements have had to occupy this kind of infrastructural space as flows of foreign investment in urban real estate have driven the unaffordability of housing for decades. And so this has forced residents into these kinds of areas. We're in really early phases of our work here, and so we're still building networks with local stakeholders, but ultimately the aim is for the model to be able to adapt to these different contexts. Our aim is to build energy efficient, safe, climate resilient homes with integrated sanitation, sewage infrastructure, and community spaces without having to relocate families to another district. So as I've mentioned, there's no shortage of need or urgency to act in these areas. And so through our work, we're aiming to demonstrate an alternative model of architectural practice that is positioned to make an impact in these rapidly developing areas that are undergoing the process of becoming urban. So as Yuki was saying, we've just recently published a book by Joshua Bolkover on the work in Mongolia, and which is now available. So please do check it out. You can find it at ddu.earth or becomingurban.earth, and I believe also at the AA bookstore. So thank you very much.